Before we begin the episode, I would like to thank our sponsor, Chin Up Goggles, the new generation of vision training. Its simplistic design eliminates downward vision, improving a player's spatial awareness, anticipation, skill acquisition and execution. The findings have been supported by scientific research in CIT, now MTU. Be sure to visit chinupgoggles.com for more. Welcome back to the Sideline Live podcast. You can follow us over on Twitter and Instagram at the Sideline Live. We'd love to hear from you. On episode 50, I'm delighted to be joined by Head of Performance and Wellbeing at West Ham United, Jenny Coady. We had a great chat discussing all coaching topics such as reflection, building confidence as a coach, connecting with your players, tools for communication and so much more. I really enjoyed chatting with Jenny, so I hope you enjoyed the episode. Hi Jenny, thanks a million for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. Delighted to be here. Looking forward to seeing where our Friday conversation will go.
Brilliant. So before we get into everything, would you mind giving a bit of an intro for the listeners who might not know who you are?
Yeah, no problem. So I am a Shamrock living all the way over here in East London. Been here 7 years. Came over initially to get more opportunities across different sports and to possibly look into doing a PhD. That was the initial pull, knowing that there was some kind of dominant money sports in the country, that if I wanted to pursue a career in sport, I had to go outside Ireland.
Okay.
So spent, I think it was the bones of 20 years playing and coaching in Ireland and around the world. And then when I moved over here, I stopped. So I did that awkward transition of 15 years playing in kind of a Super League level to not having a pre-season, not having any competitions at the weekend and kind of managing life as an adult. And then I worked in primary schools over here for 3 years. It wasn't a role that I was familiar with. So I kind of came across it, and basically it was working. They had a ring-fenced amount of money in the primary schools. So they had a load of jobs where people could go in and develop physical activity, PE sessions, and literacy in the schools with the teachers and in the lessons. So I did that for 3 years with a company, great company, and really, really enjoyed kind of exploring how I'd go about doing that job, if you like. And that led me on to coach development with UK coaching, and that just was a whole different level. It was kind of bringing me back to the performance space that I left when I first came over. And I worked with coaches along the pathway. So everything from, your majority of individuals. So there was triathlon and box and swimming, rowing, canoeing, and then there was some team sports in there as well. But there was everybody from, say, early stage of the pathway up until coaches who went to Tokyo last summer. So great experience. And that was all about kind of understanding the environment they operate in and how we can kind of make it world class or a quality development environment. And then I did a little bit, I don't know if it was a combination of the pandemic or just really missing being part of a team, because that was ingrained in me for a really, really long time. So a guy I knew in the GM at West Ham, Aidan, and said to me, would you be interested as a non-football person to come over and have, a day a week or do some work with the women's team? And I said, yeah, sure. Like I said, disclosure, I have a load of football behind me. So I've done years and years of work in Gaelic as an analyst, doing a bit of mental skills, looking at kind of an assistant coach and manager role selector. So there's loads of things I was trying to pull together, and I absolutely loved it. It was completely different from the role I had as a coach developer, but the team part was really sparky. And then I'd never been in professional football. So that's kind of where I am full time now. The role is head of performance and wellbeing. And the important part of that for me was that the performance side is the kind of competitive side coming out, that I can add all the expertise across, the different areas that I've either studied or experienced, but also then the well-being. So a little bit more around the mental health well-being, how we can create this kind of holistic environment that's safe for athletes to feel like they can actually do really well, achieve their aspirations and dreams and goals in an environment that's really supportive. And that means working not just with the players, but working with the staff as well. So lots going on, but very exciting time.
Good. And what point in your playing career did you realise you wanted to be a coach, and when did that idea kind of come to play?
That's really interesting. Yeah. So I was in transition year, and I swam up until I was in second year,
Okay.
and I had made kind of the top level, but not kind of international success. I was
Okay.
in maybe the finals a lot in different, and I really kind of again probably knew that there was a team element of that I was missing, but really enjoyed the experience, but knew there was something missing. And then I went into secondary school, and I said there was a basketball team, and I said, oh, you know what, I'll join it. So I was still trying to swim and play basketball at the same time. And I had just amazing coaches, a tough coaches at the time. So I had a school teacher, Evelyn Hearn, who was in the Mercy, and then I had Jerry Fitzpatrick in the club. I was 2 years playing, and I made the international, the Irish team. And that was the hook. That was the kind of big, like, oh, maybe you're good at this. So will you have more passion? And this is really cool.
Yeah.
And that started taking me around the world nice and early. I was 15 when we went to America for the first time. I think it was genuinely the interest I had in the type of coaching that they were giving me that I wanted to share back. My sister came into secondary school when I was in transition year, and I thought, well, I'd use this space where there was a little bit more free time to go and explore coaching. Absolutely rubbish. Unfortunately for me, they did really well in the first year and came third in the All Irelands. So I thought I was the bees, and thought, sure, what more improvement do you need to do? Like, you took it up, and here you are, and they're winning medals. But they were just a really talented bunch. And if I look back in those early years of coaching, I just absolutely cringe. But sure, at the time, I didn't have the right things in place, and I was just excited that they were winning and thought this was, representation of how good I was as a coach,
Yeah.
how naive. But that was the hook. It wasn't necessarily just the winning. It was the challenge of understanding each individual, what their needs were. There was only a few years between us. And I thought, how exciting to go on this journey and see where we can go. And then the natural progression was to get to international level. Some of that experience was really positive. Some of it wasn't. But I guess that's part and parcel, isn't it?
Absolutely. I suppose you mentioned there you moved to the UK for the development and the opportunities, but in Ireland, what at the time from your coaching experience and when you look now, what are those opportunities like, and what can we do to improve the opportunities for young coaches or coaches that want to better themselves?
Gosh, that's a great question. I had gone to Canada for a couple of years, and when I went to Canada, I coached over there, and I coached in a couple of different spaces. It was in the university and some clubs and a school, and it was just their willingness to share. It was different to what I'd experienced before. Say, there was definitely a couple of people in the local area, Waterford, and probably on the basketball circuit in around the same age or a little bit older, that would share and give some advice. But outside that, it was kind of a lonely space and a little bit of that, am I doing the right job here?
Yeah.
And the success measure was beating others, which was really shallow, to be honest. So as that moved on, and I had a little bit of experience in Canada and some other little bits along the way, I thought to myself, oh, isn't it cool to share a little bit more? And how could I make a bigger impact instead of just being with one team in a smaller space? So that was a really positive basketball experience. And when I came back, I started working for Basketball Ireland. And I worked for them for 3 years, and I could see more opportunities coming, but it just wasn't not consistent, but it wasn't safe. The funding kept changing, which is probably the nature of a lot of sports, but the pool was probably smaller and the allocation of funds narrowed to certain sports. So when I say opportunities, there's definitely a balance of people understanding what's available and then people knocking on the door to create roles. And it's not as easy, and I don't mean to, I'm not saying you could just pull it out of the air, but for me to go to West Ham and say, this is the area I want to work in, this is the role I'd like, can we make something happen? And so, yeah, kind of that balance of, it's not all about money, because, we're never going to be millionaires working in sports. So understanding why you're doing it, having the opportunities to be able to progress. And then from a personal point of view, growing your network and getting that CPD that allows you to kind of evaluate what you're doing and you're improving year on year.
I love the way you mentioned there sharing, and that's something I had a conversation with the Meath inter-county coach Colin Nally with, and he's kind of saying, like, in the GAA there's this culture of we don't share and we're looking at each other, spying on each other what everyone's doing at training, and it turns out like most of the time everyone's probably doing the same thing. But I love the way you said there share, and you mentioned CPD, and that's something I've been doing recently. I was out watching a basketball team and learning from different people. Who have you learned from? Who have you gone to visit and kind of watch and learn, and what lessons have you taken from those experiences?
So again, another great question, because I don't think at the time I understood the curiosity I had. What the curiosity I had was actually having an impact. Okay. And I probably wasn't going to observe or kind of interact with people and watch sessions for with a structure or a framework in my head. And it was probably my exposure to GA, because I literally moved from finishing my master's in sports psych to going into work with Wexford and then on to Dublin. And I hadn't, other than a few off seasons of basketball, playing Gaelic football, had no exposure, and a few games up in Welsh Park and Waterford watching and cheering on. I didn't really know what avenue I was going to go down. And then I realized that actually, yeah, there's a lot of basketball in here. There's a lot of transferable skills, how the coach relates to the player, how the coach relates to the coaching team, different barriers to performing well. Like, you know, it was all starting to come together. And then obviously in the more previous role I had here, where I worked across, you know, 15 to 20 different Olympic sports, I'm kind of saying, oh gosh, there's a lot of this happening in swimming, that's happening in rowing. And when I started to design programs for coach education and coach development, that's the conversation they were having in the room, and that was the benefit that they thought. So we, you know, one of the programs we ran was 18 months, and after all the brilliant stuff that we had and all the great feedback, they still came back in the top 2-3 things of the program was having a chance to observe other sports. So I was lucky, because I was leading the program and doing some work on it, that I could take 5 coaches from completely different sports down to an ice rink in Guildford, and we could watch a speed skating session. Wow. They didn't need to know the intricacies of it. They didn't really need to know the language, although it's useful if I'm, say, a coach developer role, to know the nuances of the sport before you go in, out of respect and connectivity. Mm-hmm. But we could mic up the coaches. The session is happening. We're listening. We're making notes, having a chat about what do you think? And then you're chatting with, luckily, if you can, the athletes at the end of the session to see if what you thought marries up. And it's really just a check and challenge. It's all at the bottom of it. They're all vehicles for conversation and understanding yourself a little bit more. What journey are you on? How has that impacted how you kind of understand and share your information, and how is that information landing, and how are you reflecting with your people? So how are you checking for knowledge, and why are you doing what you do in the relation of a planning of a session? Who's that actually for? Mm-hmm. And that's some of the stuff that we speak about regularly at West Ham. I'm fortunate, I have a lot of respect, and I give obviously a lot of respect to the team. So we share openly, you know, check and challenge on why you're doing that and how you're doing that, and sharing across the board. So yeah, I can't kind of share it strongly enough, or emphasize it strongly enough, rather, that going outside your bubble and having the courage to go and just ask, can you come and watch a session? It can have massive value.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. You mentioned there not having, let's say, the typical football experience, going to West Ham and going in with, you didn't have a lot of Gaelic football experience. Do you think that helped you, or did it hinder you as a coach coming in and being in the environment where you didn't maybe have this huge understanding of the game, or do you think that was an advantage because you could look at it from your experiences and what you've seen?
I'd say it probably had a bit from column A and a bit from column B on it, but everything that underpins what I do is about relationships and connectivity. Mm-hmm. So, and I found that from, say, transferring the work I was doing in performance analysis, how I'd get all that data, what they needed from, say, 3 selectors and a manager, how I'd be able to convey that to them individually, either during the game, halftime, or post game, or in the presentation into a lead up, you know, opposition wise, was all about the connectivity, understanding the way they saw things, challenging it when I got to a comfortable space. So I guess the key part of that for me is, yes, it was massively beneficial going into West Ham with a non-invasive eye, and being able to ask those, what we call silly, stupid questions of like, why do you do that? And why do you do that? And they're going, oh, you what? No, she's not football. And then challenging the norms.
Yeah.
You know, and this will go, oh, we don't do that in football, or we don't do that in handball, or we don't do that in badminton. Well, why don't you? Mm-hmm. And then some coaches have got to a point where they stop and they kind of go, well, why don't we actually? Mm-hmm. And why am I doing it this way? And could I try it that way if I feel supported to do it? And when you're in different spaces, I get the fact that results are important. So you're not playing around with too much stuff all the time. But if we don't ever challenge the norms, we're just go in that kind of cliched way, doing 1 year 20 times and then thinking you've done it for 20 years. So and I think the disadvantage in some cases can be just you might learn a way of operating or a way of working or have a buy-in or know the kind of language and currency of the sport a little bit better if you were immersed in it earlier. But it's just a steep learning curve.
And how do you develop the relationship with players and coaches when you go into a new environment like that?
I just speak to them, just have conversations, let them know I care, let them know, have clarity on, say, in the current role I'm in, what I'm doing, where to find me. There's probably a little bit of a formal sit down initially, either as a group or individually, to let them know that, you can be supported. If you've had a negative experience before, let's explore that and see how my role can play a really positive part in your journey. Understanding different ways of interpreting things. So the communication is key on it. So if we have some values, for me to understand what that value means to them, as opposed to just seeing it through my eyes. And then what we do off the pitch can on the pitch. So the kind of integration of the coaching team and the performance support team together. So we're all kind of working. So we're all cogs in the bigger picture of things. There's no one kind of out there on their own doing that.
From your experience with the inter-county scene and now the professional scene, what would you see as kind of the difference between the two? Like, a lot of people are making that comparison and saying, well, nowadays there isn't a difference. Inter-county has gone pretty much professional. They're just not getting paid.
Oh, absolutely. I think the obvious part is the money and the way it can be used. But I can see from the professional world that the language of buying and selling players and loaning and the commodity mindset is something that I'm kind of fighting against, not necessarily in West Ham, but just the world and culture of football and how to see that transfer. My time at Dublin was really professional. The setup was amazing. The players, from my angle, they wanted for very little, and we tried to give them as much as we could. The backroom team was brilliant, and it was really big, and it was just top quality stuff. And that was 2012. So I can only imagine there's massive growth since there. And I know my brother-in-law is involved doing some work with Waterford, so we've been chatting away and seeing, and there's progress coming from everywhere. But part of that is mindset. It's the willingness to be open to new ways of thinking, new ways of seeing the game, new ways of taking information on and processing it and connecting that with the players. So there's more autonomy there for the players to kind of own their journey. So I'd have to say that as far as my experience and the professionalism of it, there's very, very little difference on it. I think probably the exposure part, I know GA does get a lot of coverage, but I think from a multi-million-pound deal with Sky or Barclays, even in the women's game, that there's a different kind of trajectory that it's going on. And then I guess the other sports in Ireland could have some time to kind of get a little bit of a boost as well.
As a professional athlete, how do you find the difference between an amateur? Like, when you're talking about, like, I guess when you're an amateur, obviously you have a job, and I would find for myself, just the way I work, I would struggle being a professional because I would put so much pressure on myself to perform and to be the best I can be. Whereas I know, like, as an amateur, I can go do my job. I have so-called distractions. How do you find that pressure, and how do athletes in the professional world of professional sports deal with that pressure?
Wow, what a question. Day 34 on the podcast. Still going. Oh gosh, there's loads in that. There's a couple of things that struck me in that question. Some of the professional athletes who train and play at West Ham aren't on big salaries, so they do have to consider the top ups, or they do have to consider how they fund or have kind of a solid growth of their money for, I don't know, whatever, whether it's travel or mortgage or however they want to spend it. So there is a perception that you're in the professional space, and in many ways it's an incredible lifestyle to have, but there's a lot of spotlight, a lot of pressure, and a lot of assumptions. So I guess it's the opportunity to when you're in that situation, to see how you can navigate it from an amateur and professional point of view around pressure. I think that's kind of where the internal drive would come from. That if I'm playing Super League and I'm in Wildcats in Waterford and I'm playing for years, I want to win every game and I want to play well. If I was getting paid for it, I'd still want to develop and I'd still want to play well. So there are some incentives probably in the more lucrative sports that if you get bonuses and you have this and this, or maybe better facilities, I think that's where it could come into it. But the flip side, looking at say the Gaelic teams I work with in London when I came over, or even the intercounty stuff at home, would be the travel that they had to do and how they had to self-fund some of their, part of their own trip and their journey and stuff like that. So, or if they didn't have access to a physio on a regular basis, how could they fund that? So that's the biggest part of that, I guess, is how you can prepare for your competition. From a competition point of view, there's expectations for you to perform externally and then internally in your own drive. But I think you look at if they're a Gaelic player here in London, they're taking an hour and 15-minute train journey from central London to go out to Greenford to play. They're getting there and the pitch is kept in as a good condition as they can, but it's also part of a public park. And there's fundraising that has to happen during the year that comes onto their radar. The all little bits and pieces, membership and stuff that maybe in a professional game they're not looking and thinking about. But yeah, it's really interesting area to explore.
I was listening to Paul McGinley recently on the High Performance podcast, and he had a really good discussion point. I think it was with the University of Minnesota's golf coach, and they were having a kind of a discussion around having a plan A and a plan B. And Paul was saying it suited him that he had a plan B of going to college, whereas the golf coach wanted players golf was their plan A. There was no plan B. What would be your take on it from your overall experiences throughout your different sports and observing all your athletes?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. There's a lot of talk around dual career, and the FA are really good at providing opportunities, whether it's through the FA themselves or the individual clubs or the PFA, where they can get subsidised university courses. And West Ham do a great job at connecting, not just with other sports, but with universities to try and support that. So a big advocate of that. And any international players that come in, try and support and keep that going as well in different ways. So I think there's a well-being piece to that, and finding the balance of whether it's study or it's finding a new skill or it's joining a new kind of activity or something to do that's a healthy balance that doesn't detract too much of what they're doing in their daily work and their training, etc. And I think that would be brilliant to have, instead of what I see in some the last couple of years primarily, and then obviously some of the Olympic athletes transitioning post Tokyo in 2020 were saying, oh, what I do now, where's my identity at? But I'm just an athlete doing this sport, and I've only known this, so how can I do X, Y, and Z? And so I think it's really healthy for people to have an interest in something else, to be, for us, and especially I will, and definitely in my role this year, to encourage people to explore what they like to do. And if they don't, then you're in an unreal city in London to go and explore. And I don't believe it has to distract you too much from your working, you're working out, the gym, the training, and your mental work as well. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that it doesn't come down to just the end part of your career. And I think coaches who just become really rigid on that mindset can massively impact an athlete. Because there's always a pull to go in a different direction. Like athletes, especially professional athletes or full-time athletes, are making a choice all the time. They're making a choice to not go out with friends. They're making a choice to miss this occasion, to choose to go and do something else, or delay having a family. All these things that we're trying to change the narrative on and say, well, why can't you? How can we work around that? So it parallels with your sporting career, and there's not a massive drop when you transition or when you have a setback.
I've been taking down notes during our chat, and I took down check and challenge, and you mentioned doing that with a couple of West Ham players. Can you explain that technique there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the optimum, I mean, it's very utopian here, the space that we try and operate is in a high support and high challenge. It's not sustainable all the time, but we want to be aware of, if we're challenging and kind of building that relationship of honesty through challenge, that we need to have a support system around it. Not necessarily where one person is getting onto someone all the time and then they get upset, or there's lack of clarity, and then they go to somebody else for comfort. But it's knowing that somebody cares about you, we care about the development, they understand how to communicate with each other. So there's high challenge in both directions, and then support around it kind of in a simplistic way. And the check and challenge part of that goes beyond that to your own understanding. So how do I check and challenge my own knowledge? How do I check for understanding and challenge if I'm working with an athlete or they're working with me or another coach? So it's on a personal level, the check and challenge is, I have certain ways of looking at things. I've constructed this view of something based on my experience over the years. How am I checking my knowledge? And who say, even if it's as simple as Twitter, have I got all the same type of people in my following, or that I follow rather? So when I'm scrolling through, oh yeah, oh that's how I think, oh yeah. Instead of going, oh, that's a different way of thinking, and not shutting it down, trying to understand their perspective, so I can, kind of check and challenge myself on that. So yeah, a multitude of views there on that, but the challenge word's important, done in the right way. And I am constantly looking to support the coaches and the players to know how we feedback, when we feedback, what that looks like, and the right kind of outcome that we want from that interaction. So yeah, lots in that.
That's brilliant. I'm definitely going to rob that term from you. And what I love about it all is it's kind of coming back to that like self-awareness as a player and as a coach, and you being able there to say, well, that's the way I think. So why don't I go to another way of thinking, and I kind of see, and I'm not so like, oh, that's not the way I think, so I'm not going to look at that. And how important is that even as players to be able to have that self-awareness?
Yeah, so important. And like if I look at the years of coaching, I think this is probably a key part. Over the years of playing basketball, we had different coaches from different places around the world, and different ways of looking at things, and valuing kind of relationships or ways of coaching, etc. So we'd be in a position where one year I might have a coach who's very autocratic, and we just, we're submissive, depending on the age, but we're submissive, we don't challenge a lot, and we go through the motions. The next year we have a coach who's all about questioning. Athlete-centered, questions everything, and now I don't know how to answer, or when or where to answer. I don't know what you want me to say when you say to talk and communicate. So you're kind of in those 2 years, 2 seasons alone, with all the ups and downs of basketball in between, and possibly some international exposure, I'm checking kind of my knowledge for like, oh, okay, well, what did I understand by that? And am I in a position to challenge back? And that comes from a safe space and the trust, but there has to be a point where, to be really kind of not just the task cohesion, the social cohesion, and that to build as a unit to go forward, because we have clarity on kind of how our mental models are aligned, if you like.
I'm interested in that trust factor, and I was saying to you before what I'm doing, and when players come together from different clubs, I suppose they're used to being nearly enemy number one when you've the big rivalries. But how do you promote the trust within the group, particularly maybe during an early stage? Like, obviously trust does grow over time, but is there any particular activities or something you've seen that you'd really recommend exploring?
Yeah, I suppose there are loads of small little bits and pieces you can do on an activity front, but the key part is just kind of the authentic approach. Just, people can read through fakeness. And I know that as a coach, we have many hats to wear. And sometimes, you might arrive having had a most horrific day and you're putting on this front. I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about the honest feedback and the consistency in your message, and the willingness to see the person before you see the player. So that those difficult conversations around maybe selection or time on the court or whatever it is, that they can be had a little bit easier and more upfront, because that the underpinning part of that is, oh, we've had this conversation before, I have clarity on where I'm at, and there's a consistent message coming, and etc., etc. So I think the building of trust is just the realness that you can bring to that, and then you can start to build on that, because the message becomes a little bit more consistent, and there's a trust building in that. Listen, if you have something to say to me, let's share it, let's make time for it. That isn't all about numbers and results, and I only see you on competition day. It's the part of like, if you arrive in a gym and I'm coaching, how am I greeting you? What's that eye contact and that kind of facial engagement like at the start? How am I checking in with you to see how you have arrived at the session? And then at the end of the session, or even during at the end of the session, coming to that, how are we leaving the session? Have I spoke to you? Have I engaged with you in a non kind of technical way to understand how you found the session and what you got out of it? So for the players who then maybe have a little bit of a tendency to kind of internalize and use heavily kind of subjective feelings on the session, they're not going off and fueling their own fire and coming back to the next session with this picture that's built that's bigger than it needs to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I suppose, I think some of that would nearly take confidence for a coach to be able to approach a team or a player and be able to have a conversation with them surrounding. It doesn't even have to be anything bad or complicated, just being able to ask them about their life off the court or pitch or track or whatever sport it is. And like, as a coach, if there's anyone listening that maybe does struggle with that side of things, how do you build confidence in approaching players, or even just in your ability and your communication?
Oh my gosh, what great
I'm
question.
grilling you today.
It's great questions. Part of me, well, from experience, part of me knows that it's time. It's time and energy and effort put into it. So I'm not just going the one avenue of how I experience coaching. I do my plans that way. I'm checking in to see different age groups, different genders. I have a mentor. I'd reflect at the end of a session. Like, if I know that all of those little bits and pieces are coming together, there's small bits that come. And I think part of that does have an impact on the imposter syndrome. So like, I'll still be in different environments and I'll have, say, done a presentation before on a certain topic that's really familiar, and I'll go into a room and I'll go, actually, you're doing this. Like, what?
Okay.
So there's a little bit there, but part of that is referring back kind of in a self-efficacy kind of way. Have I got feedback on this before? Have I done it before? Do I believe I can do this? And filling into this role and owning this role a little bit more. I don't think it's as far over as there's a Amy Coady talks about faking it till you make it in a TED talk. I think, part of that can be the body language and the ownership and what you dress and how you feel. But on a realistic side of it, part of it is putting in the effort. Are you reading a little bit more academic papers or articles about things? Are you reflecting on your practice? Have you got a mentor? Are you visiting other sports? Are you growing your network? Because if all of those pieces are coming together and you're hearing, not in a kind of echo chamber way of, oh, you're brilliant, and this, that small group around you is your little cheerleading pack, but the confidence can build small little pockets from there. Then there's your measure of success. If in your early stages of your coaching, if everything is about winning, which unfortunately, some people do look at that. You win and you think, as I did in my early days, oh, I've won a medal in the final, in the semi-final. I'm brilliant. Sure, listen, I'll stop here and I'll probably just hang up the boots. And that's amazing. And, I think it's around like understanding what your measure of success is, why you're doing what you do. And that helps bring you back to, well, actually, it's not me as a coach. I'm not rubbish because I lost 3 games. Are the people in front of me developing? Are they enjoying their experience? Do I know what enjoyment looks like for them? Well, okay, I'm on a little bit of a winner here. And the reality of sport is that your confidence is situational. So it'll ebb and flow. It's just whether you can boundary that off so it doesn't bleed into your personal life as well. I don't know how realistic that can be, but if you're passionate about something, you'll be thinking about it at night time and you'll be waking up trying to solve the problems. But the healthy balance, which is, the well-being and mental health side of my concern as well for people, is also important.
I love the way you mentioned there what you measure as success, because that's actually a question I ask a lot of the podcast guests. So I'd love to pose that question to you. What do you measure as success?
I shared the infographic that Katie Warner put on Twitter a little while ago. So there's a book called No Hard Feelings, and I really like this book. It's Liz and Molly. They wrote the book, and there's some illustrations which people,
I've seen them. They're brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah, so Katie used this to create a measure of success that I shared and had a great conversation with the West Ham women about. And it was checking that, our medals and our beating others was at the top of this. And underneath it was inspiring others, being a role model, connecting, enjoyment. Some winning is in there because that's the bite in the hook, and being good at things. So having your smaller wins or your smaller elements of the mastery instead of this bigger long-term picture always kind of hanging around. The measure of success really is, am I enjoying it? Am I enjoying what I do? Am I getting feedback so I can develop, because I am a curious by nature and I love kind of seeing how you can, how this works, how that operates. Can we get a little bit more out of this? Like that is really important to me, to see if we can also change and in a bigger picture, change the narrative. So I'm a massive advocate of women in sport and obviously women in coaching. And I do a good bit of work with a couple of bodies here in the UK. And that's another measure of success. Is there more visibility? Are we able to perform in an environment that's healthy and happy? So there's loads of kind of smaller ambitions that I have that have a bigger kind of, hopefully a bigger ambassador element to it. But I think if we can all be, leave the ladder down and we can be ambassadors for change within that space, those are the measures of success for me. If West Ham get to the top of the table, well, that is just a jolly. That's absolutely fantastic. But if at the end of this year, we're not at the top of the table, but players have confidence back, they've enjoyed the experience, they feel supported, they're driven to go in whatever direction, that's a great start for the first year, I think.
And is that something that you had a chat with the girls at the start of the year and kind of said, look girls, my goal here with my role is what you just named there?
Yep. I started with this is my role, this is why it's important for me to have both. And for me to understand where they're at, where they want to go, and what part I can play to support them in that. The cliched door is always open, always hated that phrase because it meant that somebody had to come to your door. So now I'm immersed in the environment. I'm out having walks, we're out walking the pitches, having chats. I'm in the chill room, which is their kind of social space, just checking in as they're having breakfast. How's everyone doing? Yeah, we have well-being questionnaires. So if I see any kind of that are below a certain percentage, it's just a vehicle for conversation. So there's a big care and coaching part of that for me there. And there's a lot of clarity around, not forced conversation, but a lot of clarity on the openness that we can have, the gratitude we can have, the positive affirmations and how they can affect them, all of those things.
I love the way you mentioned the questionnaires, because I was going to ask you how much feedback do you get from the players, and just as you mentioned the questionnaires, what sort of questions do you ask them?
So a lot of the kind of typical questions around their perception of the sleep quality, the amount of hours they're having, fatigue, mood, stress. There's a number of different ways you can calculate it, but we look at kind of 0 being a baseline and they go above or below that. So I can see by the numbers and then in each of the categories where people are at. Other people can go from 0 to 5 or 0 to 10 and then look at a percentage. But at the end of the day, the medical team can take what they want out of it. The coaching team, we have meetings every morning so we can share some of the insight. But the real part of that for me, and going back to relationships and building relationships, is the fact that if somebody's willing to share something in that well-being questionnaire in the morning or the wellness questionnaire, I feel like we're getting a little bit closer, that they trust us a little bit more with the information. And that means that then if we are open in our kind of staff communication, that we can then impact how that interaction goes. And that's really important.
Yeah, that's something I've done with in my role with my team. Was we it wasn't a wellness questionnaire, but it was kind of like a player kind of workbook that they filled out, and I remember reading some of the answers, like, oh my god, you were just getting this huge insight that yes, and you, like as you said, you then approach the conversation. Now thankfully it was all positive feedback, and we didn't have to do anything like that, but the feedback we got and the depth and understanding of the player was just, and I'm actually going to correct myself, the depth and understanding of the person that we got was phenomenal. And I think that's something that I think coaches really need to look towards more, because I kind of like sometimes you see coaches from at all different ages and experiences, and maybe it's sort of that traditional old-fashioned route that we didn't maybe look towards well-being a lot maybe 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, and what I've noticed from, not just from that that survey in the morning. But if we have a mindfulness session that we have every morning, and then I might be having lunch and a player will just come and sit down and have a chat. I'm in on the pitch, so I'm not in the middle of the session, but I'm on the sideline. And as they transition between different parts of the training session, I'm there. So I'm visible and I'm engaged and I'm interested in what they're doing. And I can connect with the coaches after the session to see if they noticed anything. I'm chatting to the analyst, I'm chatting to the medical team. I'm chatting to the S&C. Everybody's kind of coming. We have a kit woman this year, which is incredible to see because I've only ever seen kit men. So
Brilliant.
and she's amazing and she's noticing different things. So open channels of communication, which is one of the values that we have anyway, gives us an opportunity to really kind of maximize our interaction and then hopefully unlocking different potential or giving the confidence to the player to own that and unlock it themselves.
What are the values of the team, if you can share them? I don't know if they're kept within the group.
Oh my God, it's so secretive.
Oh,
No, if it is actually secretive or not, but I'm happy to share. So unity, discipline, respect, and communication. They're the four. And it's important for all of the players, which we did, to share their understanding of each of those words, what it looks like and feels like, and then we just sign it off. And some of those exercises for some people be like, oh, that's very cliched and very typical, but it's been really useful for our group of players to explore that, because as I said, they're all on different journeys. Some have come from different clubs over a number of years. Some have come from different countries. Culturally, some people are invested in the sport in a different way. So for me and us as a coaching team and the players to understand what respect looks like, good and great and exceptional for each player, then we can hold ourselves accountable. But there's the autonomy to explore that as a person and as a player then on the pitch as well.
do you find any particular activities that work for kind of ownership and developing leaders within the group?
I think a great part, and in my small stint there last year, we explored what leadership they had been exposed to before. So that was a really interesting interaction. So again, there were a lot of conversations. I tend to not use as much bells and whistles and gimmicks and stuff. And I do like that you can be really efficient in a questionnaire survey, but if you can at all get it across in a conversation, then brilliant. But it was around them understanding that leaders look different and understanding kind of what empathic leadership or authentic leadership could look like. And they actually are all leaders in their own way. Some just show it in different ways. So empowering everybody to be more kind of everyday leaders is what our aspiration is.
And how do you empower the leaders every day?
Oh my gosh. How do I empower? I don't know if the way that was phrased made me feel like I had the control to empower. But yes, no, because we did have a conversation about the difference between, as a staff, between empowering and enabling. And I think the empowering part of that is listening. So I listen to, if a player comes in and has chat in the morning, or we're sitting down having breakfast, whatever, I will listen to what it is and I will ask them what they think the solution is. What tools do they have in their toolkit? And then we can go from there. I don't try and go in solution focused as much as I'd like to sometimes. And it's kind of at the tip of my tongue. I'll hold back to see if they can navigate that space, because it's all transferable onto the pitch anyway. If they can problem solve and they can understand how to navigate a problem and utilize each other, then that's far more beneficial than me just kind of saying, oh, here's a tick box answer, letting them kind of unpick it themselves. And so it is still a kind of a collaborative effort, but the empowerment part of that would be listening and helping them kind of navigate this and unpick it themselves.
Mm-hmm. Overall, what do you think is the biggest lesson you've maybe learned from coaching or sport?
My gosh almighty, tonight. Gosh, this is a good one. Be me. I think I'd probably be unapologetically me. It's a phrase that I have shared before, and I think there was maybe the early days of coaching, because there wasn't many females in sport or in coaching. I would probably try to mimic some of the behavior of the coaches that I had and
Okay.
try to be like other people. And then in different spaces I operated in, um, maybe just kind of from immaturity or needing a bit of support and mentoring that I didn't have or didn't seek rather, would be trying to be wallpaper in the environments I was in. So don't try and stand out, don't initially challenge. Um, and then what if this and what if that, and kind of worrying about how messages landed and stuff. So as I got maybe more tools in the toolkit, read a little bit more, had some mentors, grew my network, and grew a little bit more in confidence, I could be more me and kind of this is where I'm at, this is my understanding, and be kind of unapologetic about that.
Hmm.
So that's probably a key part. I think there's loads of other little lessons along the way, but growing into myself and owning that role a little bit more, being confident in what I know, applying for jobs and opportunities that maybe I thought were a little bit out of my grasp. And
Hmm.
then when I get in there, owning that role and going back to my baseline of connecting with the people that are around me. So I think that's a key part.
Do you find that you reflect a lot as a coach, or is that something, or do you just find you kind of stay in the moment and you don't really look back to the journey much?
Massive reflection is absolutely massive in all forms.
Okay.
I've explored it with coaches in kind of audio notes and videos, in written journaling. There's loads of different Brendan Cropley over in Wales. He does some work on reflection, and he has a certain way of kind of exploring that. Uh, Jennifer Moon does some work on reflection, where she talks about writing, and then you kind of got your superficial layer of the what part, and then going into the next layer of it.
Hmm.
So I always encourage people to reflect. And in the programs that I've been part of, either on it or designed it, we do incorporate and try to normalize reflection. And some people in some of the research will say, well, then it becomes a surveillance. But actually, the feedback has been, because we put that in place initially and it was on the agenda, then I did it, and now I don't need a nudge for that. And it
Hmm.
was just the courage to kind of, if it is sharing a video or reflection at the end of the month or end of the week, that they had the courage to kind of listen to themselves speak out loud,
Hmm.
think in a way that isn't just the what, well, it's how it affected me and what was the impact on my behavior and what would I have done differently the next time, or how does this inform my next training session, etc. So the other project that we worked closely with was a project called Think Aloud. And Dr. Amy Whitehead, who's co-editing a book with me, she has done an amazing amount of work in Thinking Aloud, which is a reflective tool of miking yourself up and thinking and
Brilliant.
speaking aloud. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. The results have been amazing. People listening to themselves for the first time, people able, as you mentioned there, reflecting in action. So it isn't your typical post game, sit down, unpick all the things that went wrong, make a note and move on. You're reflecting in action, and you're able to alter some ways that you can continue either delivery or your interactions in the session or the experience. But then it also shifts your mindset from just reflecting on the negative.
Hmm.
Like, you're kind of looking at the broader picture, and you're normalizing this kind of the feelings and thoughts that you have throughout an experience. So
Hmm.
yeah, I'm a massive fan of reflection, and I do it in all different sizes. I think when I finished UK coaching, I had almost 1,200 audio
Wow.
notes that I recorded, not audio notes, voice recorders. So when I'd meet with a coach, I'd obviously make my kind of official proper notes, but I'd sit in the car before I drive somewhere, and I would just sit and I'd just download the interaction and listening to the kind of the first few to how I refined them. And the more I read and understood about it, kind of the more effective I was at capturing the important parts, or what I perceived to be the important parts. And I also was able to then go back to some of them before I met that coach the next time, to see how my feelings, what was coming through in the audio as well as the written. So
And did you have a particular structure to your reflection, or is it just, as you said there, just listening and making notes? What, like, what went
yeah.
well, what didn't go well?
Yeah, so there's a number of different things that I've tried, and sometimes it varies. I try not to be too rigid on it,
Okay.
but I did try and refine it when I came to the voice, from like 10 minutes to 3 minutes, which was definitely more of a efficient. But there's a load of different cycles that are out there that you can, from a theoretical point of view, or frameworks that you can use. Some have found them really helpful. So like your so what now, your what, your so what, and your now what kind of cycle, or a couple of the more kind of heavily theoretically founded ones. And I know they can still be checked and challenged as well. But for me, it was, what did I see, what did I feel, and what did I hear? So if I went and I had an observation with a coach and I was poolside for that, what was I seeing from the minute I walked in, from the interactions, the body language, the proximity, the visuals on the board, the session plan, the layout, what did I hear? So what types of interactions did I hear? And then from, I guess, the see, feel, hear. So what was I feeling? What kind? And this is really important for me because, like, obviously there's an kind of an intuitive element to that as well. And what was I picking up from this environment? But the other stuff around that helped me pad it up. There was some other frameworks, not necessarily more around kind of behavioral elements of who's coaching, what are they coaching, and how are they coaching, linked to the goals and objectives. So sometimes it was more structured on that, using kind of whether it's a Gibbs or a Rolf or one of those reflective models, or else just going to those 3 words and seeing if I can look at that. There was a 3 eyes that I shared with a coaching group before, that Steve Ingham had shared at a conference, and it was to, if people were going, because there was pre-COVID, there was a lot of people going to different conferences and stuff, and it was what interested you, what inspired you, and what would you like to invest more time in? And that, even as a reflective nudge, or again a loose model, helped people kind of go, okay, and then how would I invest more time, and why would I? So yeah, that's a long-winded answer to my passion on reflection.
Oh, I love it. I've had 3 pages here already of notes, but I love the way you said there, kind of the 3 eyes, like that's brilliant. And even, sorry, as well, the feel, because I remember, like, I'm a player, so I don't necessarily remember everything my coach says. Now, obviously in a match I would, because sure, that's the instruction to go do it. But when I reflect back on my underage coaching career, I remember how my coach made me feel. They made me feel confident. They made me feel they made me feel empowered. Like, and I think that's something maybe we really need to look more towards as coaches. Is, yes, we might be saying X or Y, but if we don't make our players feel the way they should feel, then our words don't really matter.
Yeah, that's it. They don't land, and that's a really good question for a coach to, like, you not just check for understanding, but like, how has that impacted? So tell me, tell me if you understand it, or show me that you understand it, but actually, how do you feel about what that message is, how that message is coming across?
Mm-hmm. Is there anything in particular that we're overlooking as coaches that you've observed through talking to coaches, observing sessions, giving your webinars and your presentations?
I think it's probably connectivity. I think we're still miles off that idea of like a community of practice, or a shared learning space.
Mm-hmm.
That it's become more accessible since COVID to drop a message to somebody who you maybe thought was out of your reach, from an experience level, and just say, hey, can I hop on a call for half an hour? And like I did that the other day. Coach Liz Mills, who's coaching the in the basketball space, she is just breaking absolutely, like, all the ceilings. And
is she the women's coach?
I think,
in
yeah,
I know who you're talking about. Yeah, I follow her on Twitter. She's brilliant.
So she's got a few titles here. So basketball coach, head coach in the Kenyan men's national team. And then she's got her own, masters in coaching and all those other qualifications.
Mm-hmm.
But like, just breaking some ceilings, owning the role. And I went onto Twitter one day and replied to something. And she said, yeah, no problem, I'll have a catch up.
Brilliant.
And I thought, wow, this is amazing. And so, like, I think that's a gap that we have, that maybe there's a perception that either I can't reach it, or what would I say in that conversation? And, I've often done book clubs, or, connectivity or networking events. Sometimes there's 30, 40 people. Other times there's only about 6 or 7.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still great. The conversation's really rich. It's uplifting. We're sharing. Nobody feels a hope. Anyway, they haven't fed back yet that they feel intimidated. So I think that's something that we're probably missing the boat on. Yeah. How can I just organize a chit chat, have a regular, meet up with people who are, well, it have to be somewhat regular, on the same kind of purpose that you want to get out of something, and kind of some commonality there that allows you to connect. But I think it's massive.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you this question, and I thought it was a good one for yourself, but what do you think, what do you find separates the best players from the rest of the pack? What is that difference maker for those type of players?
The first word that came into my mind was consistency.
Okay.
I think it's the athletes that I've seen over the last 4 or 5 years training. They're in love with the process, so they're not driven by an Olympic gold medal. That's the an amazing kind of outcome. But if they were constantly to think 4 years ahead in a cycle, or 5 as Tokyo was, then they would hate the everyday side of things, and it would be a real kind of drag to get there. So it was the consistency of their training, their commitment to being an athlete, kind of the best athlete that they can be. And I think that kind of, it doesn't, I'm assuming that the foundation is already there, the hard work and the commitment to doing what they do, but it's the consistency element of that that can separate the rest of who can achieve that level of excellence on a more regular basis. That's what I think really separates the rest, because people will have peaks and troughs in their, I say, coachability, and actually still that word kind of unsettles me a little bit, because if we have the right type of relationship, then everybody's coachable. But if you have the grounds in, and people understand what it takes to win, and you have a real nourishing environment, then it's the consistency of that, the consistency of your interactions, your commitment to get done what you do, your goals, and understanding the why part of that and the attainable elements of those. So yeah, consistency.
I asked a coach recently, and he gave a similar answer to you, and he said sort of consistency and being able to show up in big moments when not everybody can. Do you think that's down to their ability, or do you think that's down to the individual and their character?
Oh gosh, and this is a really interesting one. So I mentioned that book earlier. It's a Myths of Sports Coaching book we're bringing out, and Trish Jackman has done a great chapter in that book, and it's on clutch performance. It's really interesting read. No spoilers coming from me. You'll have to read that. But the interesting part of that is, I don't know if the big performance part of that for me would be how many opportunities in training did they get to do that? How much emphasis is put on the importance of mental training as it is physical? So that we can have people like, one of the stats, okay, this is a spoiler, one of the stats in the chapter talks about actually understanding that we might see that, Michael Jordan takes the game-winning shot X amount of times, but in a couple of games that they analyze, or what's more than a couple, that in the fourth quarter he's actually taken a massive amount, and that this is just one of the shots. So and that has done that chapter no justice in that little ramble, but anyway, you get where I'm going with it. So it's kind of just how many opportunities have you had to look at those scenarios and to put the constraints in training, and then to work on the mental side as well as the physical, as I've said, so that those moments don't have to be big moments.
Yeah.
There's still pressured moments, if the clock's running down and we're down X, Y, and Z. But again, I think, as much simulation as you can get in really helps.
I'd love to get your take on this as well. I've asked athletes actually in particular, do you find, if you could put it as percentages or kind of break it up into the two, is sport actually, I'm going to pose that question to you, is it more physical or mental?
Oh, I don't think it could be either or. I think you need a good, happy balance of that. I think if you have, there's so much that you need from a physical point of view to get to a certain level, and to enjoy the experience, and to kind of keep building. And you can't have one without the other. So the mental side is definitely become more important. The education around it has, become more visible and accessible. So they're a great couple, I think, the mental and the physical. So I think people understanding the importance, coaches not feeling that, I know a bit about physical and nothing about mental, so I'll leave that to somebody else, that we can all explore a little bit, and if you're lucky enough to have the provision of a sports psych, mental skills coach, performance consultant, that they can, enlighten and support your athletes, but actually you're the one they want the feedback from. You're the one that will have those difficult conversations or challenging parts in a training session. So understanding the importance of each of those areas of the kind of the psyche and how that filters in is equally as important as you thinking about how you're going to plan the physical element into a training session with your S&C coach.
I'm going to move on to the sideline 7 because we actually could be here all day talking. I'm just conscious of your time.
I think it's Saturday.
So it's the sideline 7. It's the same 7 questions at the end of every episode. It's slightly thought-provoking, so I'm going to start with question 1. What is your favourite quote?
My favourite quote is a guy called Bill Nye. Has a quote, and it says, "Everybody we ever meet will know something that you didn't know."
Okay.
So that is kind of what I base my life on, that every interaction can be amazing, and somebody that I meet every day will know something that I don't know. So can I be curious enough to ask that question and find out?
Love it. I recently asked a podcast guest, he's a professional basketball player, Sean Flood, I don't know if you know him, but he said his favourite quote was, "Pressure is a privilege." And I'm interested to get your take on that.
Yeah, I think it's a perception, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a perception. So, whatever. It's a really interesting one to unpick because I'm trying to think beyond sport with it. That it's a perception of what pressure is, and each to their own on that. And then if we think of the tools in the toolkit, if I have a coping strategy and I can use pressure in the right way, it could be very beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's probably distinguishing then how that maybe bleeds over to stress. And do I feel like I don't have the coping strategies, and how much of that is building? But it's an interesting one.
Yeah, there was another quote from Aoife Callahan on Twitter, or on Instagram, just give her a shout out, but she was saying pressure can burst pipes or form diamonds. And I thought for me that was really big, because as a player I put huge pressure on myself. It's like, no, hold on. Pressure I can perform in pressure and I can become this diamond.
Yeah. It's a lovely one, and that kind of visual can keep the sparkle going. So if I just persevere a little bit more here, if I embrace it, if I walk towards the pressure, then I'm able to look at the glisten that's there. But I also would, it's okay if it bursts every so often. It's kind of understanding how I can use that as a launch pad, not a setback, and see, well, why did that happen? What were the triggers? How did I cope? And how can I use that to help me going forward? But I love that.
Question 2, best sporting event you've been to?
So I think the most kind of wow factory one that I was at was when I went to the first World University Games in Korea. And, we're young, we're coming out of the stadium and it's full, and hadn't been to an Olympics or anything like that. So this was the first big, wow, this is really cool. You have your kind of setup of your Olympic village, if you like, and just all the professionalism that came with that was really kind of not overwhelming, but was a big wow factor. Yeah, it was really cool.
Is there any particular sporting event you'd like to go to?
I'd love to go to Olympics.
Yeah.
I've been to them as a spectator, but I'd love to work at one and just see how that. Yeah. Love to work at one and support the athletes and coaches. But I love events. I absolutely love going to events with the volume and the kind of stimulation that you get when you're there, kind of how people interact, if you're close enough to listen to the interactions of the coach and the players and the behavior and all that, or you're really far back and you feel the passion of a community supporting a team. It's just absolutely fascinating, no matter what sport it is. I think, as cliched as is, I could probably watch paint dry if there was two drips chasing each other and I had a bit of Rocky going on in the background, a bit of popcorn, I'm away.
Third question, biggest setback or challenge so far in your career?
So I think one of them would be knowing when to stop playing or when to transition out of playing kind of Super League level. There was for me, and there definitely is in the stuff I read and the athletes I speak to, this hesitation to kind of cut it, to stop and finish and transition. And I know there's a lot of work being done and still way, way more to go to support athletes to transition. So we talked earlier about dual careers, like it not being this, oh, now you've you've stopped at this, now you pick something up, that it's a smoother transition and the support systems and structures are in place. So it was knowing when to stop. And, when I finished and moved to London, I still wanted to play a little bit, but I thought, let's look at career options and go in a different direction. And the choices I'd made for X amount of years, I now had to look and kind of go in a different direction. So that was a really big challenge. And there was quite a dip in confidence, in identity, in kind of the struggle to see who I was and what I liked and how I could, use my time. And I'd also moved to a different city at the same time. So really big challenge in a sporting space. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Fourth question, your biggest achievement in or outside of coaching?
I'm going to take outside for 500, please. Getting married during COVID, we'd set it to go, the year COVID came in the July, and disappointingly we had to cancel, as so many hundreds of other people had to, or thousands. Yeah. And then we rescheduled it, and then COVID didn't go away. It stayed lingering on our shoulders. So this past April, my wonderful wife and I got married in London. So it was just lockdown was opening on the Monday, like fully opening, and we got married on the previous Saturday. So we had some little wins there, but still, we still faced adversity when we're trying to be positive. So no doubt we'll have another celebration come into the anniversary in the new year. But yeah, that was a massive, big achievement.
Mm-hmm. Looking back, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Get connected, network, enjoy the journey. It's very cliched as well, but you spend a lot of time in the early days trying to understand what success was, what good looked like, how I was being perceived. The ego was coming into it. So networking with people, growing the network, like even physically writing it down. Who's in my network? How close am I to them? What's the strength of the relationship? What's the communication like? And not being afraid to get things wrong, not being afraid to ask questions, and seeing different perspectives, kind of staying with that difference is really important.
Who is your dream dinner guest and why?
So I'd probably say, if I could have two people, because I'll just be selfish.
Yeah, I'll allow it.
Will you? Okay, thank you so much for permission. I'd probably say Brene Brown. From all the stuff I've listened to and read, I think she'd be a very down-to-earth guest, and just, she's got a great podcast as well. And some of the questions she asks, and understanding her whole area around vulnerability and shame. And Adam Grant, another big TED Talk sensation, but he's an organizational psychologist, and I read a lot of his books and just interested in his view on things. So I think it'd be a really interesting conversation. Probably talk more, eat less during that, but yeah, it'd be a hell of an evening.
Brilliant. Last question before I let you go. If your life was a book, what chapter would this be called?
I probably could use what I said about unapologetically me, but I think I'll probably say dropping the ladder down.
Okay.
I'm in a really fortunate position where women's football and women in sport is on the agenda, and it's growing massively. So I'll have the opportunity and the platform to support other people, to share, to support other clubs, and understanding the importance of not just having a head of performance, but having a head of well-being and performance. Some of the men's clubs have it, but just all of this kind of evolving part of women in sport, I think I could just leave the ladder down for a few people, as people have done for me in the past.
Mm-hmm. Jenny, look, that was incredible. I'm going to say to you here, I need to get you on again at some point in the future, because that was phenomenal. I've so many more questions I want to ask you, but thank you so much, and the very best of luck in your role and on and off the pitch, and just thank you so much for your time.
You're more than welcome. Thanks for asking. Really appreciate it. Great questions.
A massive thank you to Jenny for joining me today. I thoroughly enjoyed our chat, and I hope you got something from it. I'll be sure to leave all of our social media links in the description box below. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a rating and a review, as it does help the show grow. The response lately has been phenomenal, so I really do appreciate your support. Keep up to date with all of our content over on social media at The Sideline Live. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.